Hey, good morning. We're starting Shin Pei Hei. Just a quick recap, just to clarify, if a person's on a cruise ship, so what do? So we mentioned that normally it'd be similar, Lamaisa, it's similar to a hotel, and if people come stay there, and many, and including Ramosha, Paskins, that you don't need to make an Eruv because of Tfisas Habayis, Tfisas Yad. The owner has something in every one of the rooms. And sometimes they have the right to remove you or switch rooms whenever they want. Okay. Also by a ship, all the non-Jews are in a hotel, they're always just transitory unless they're there all the time, like the crew itself. But anyways, regardless, usually it's not needed because, as we mentioned. Shin Pei Hei, Aleph. So now we're going to learn about someone who's Jewish. Right? We learned about someone who's a regular Jew and a regular non-Jew. Now we're going to talk about someone who doesn't keep all the mitzvahs. There's not moda in the mitzvahs of Eruvin. So how do we treat them? They're somewhat in the middle. So, Aleph. Tzidoki, Harehu ki Yisrael, umevatel reshus. So Tzidoki, so he is a person who believes in the Torah, he believes in Hashem, and he keeps the mitzvahs. But only Torah shebichtav, and generally not any of the Torah shebe'al peh. Right? And there could be any modern equivalent, whether you call them a Tzidoki or not. There are some of those who only want to keep what's written. Okay. So for those, they are a Jew. And if you live with them, you have to make an Eruv. However, you can't include them with your food. Like a proper Eruv here, I'm going to read it. Umevatel reshut. The option for them to do is for them to say, I am mevatel my reshus, I'm giving you the property and you can use it, or for Shabbos, whatever. He's mevatel his reshus to you, whatever that means. Aval Eruv, eno mo'il. But he cannot be included in the actual Eruv. Kevan she'enu modeh be'eruv, because he doesn't believe in it. Eruvin is only derabanan, and it's not something he agrees to, and therefore he doesn't have shaychus to eruv. Now, also when now he's not a goy that you have to rent from. He's a Jew, so but he can't do eruv chatzeros. So how do you, now, this comes up, anyone who lives in the city, there's always going to be some of these types of people. Or people who are, they have the same category also of...
Tzidoki these days is rare.
Okay, no, so it's irregular Tzidoki these days is rare, very well. But these are the same category as Jews who are Tinuk Shenishba. Beis Yosef actually calls Tzidoki, he actually says it's the same din as Tinuk Shenishba. He doesn't mention as Tinuk Shenishba here, but he says it really comes from the same source. And they keep them, or Tzidoki actually keeps the mitzvahs, and they keep them minhag avotav. And he says it's similar to Tinuk Shenishba, and it would be the same even if they don't keep the mitzvahs at all. So we have those in apartments that we share, we have them in the city. So the general minhag is we rely on schirus, because they're not modeh be'eruvin, so you can't use them for eruvin. Perhaps there's an opinion that says you can, but I don't know, Pashtus is not. And regardless, the minhag is we do schirus. Even by a Jew, can you do schirus by a Jew? So we learned two opinions just a few days ago, a few simanim ago, that generally the Shulchan Aruch has two opinions. If schirus works for a Jew, or he has to only do eruvin or bittul, and so he brings two opinions. And basically, I would say it's a machloket achronim if you can rely on schirus lechatchila or whenever there's a need. But bottom line, when there's a need, certainly everyone agrees schirus works. And if bittul works, schirus works. At least if there's a need, again, some say lechatchila. So, okay. Beis. Kuti. Hareu kisha'ar amim. Now, someone who is a kuti, so he has the din of complete non-Jew, right? These are the ones who was questionable if they converted or not. and we consider them l'maisa like non-Jews. Ve'ein lo takana ela bischirus. So, okay, and then there's no choice, only to do schirus. Okay. Gimel. Yisrael mumar lavodas elilim. So a Jew who is a mumar, it's not happened just once, but he's a person who does avodah zarah. And for avodah zarah, even if you do it in private. Or lachalel Shabbos b'farhesia, or a person is machalel Shabbos in public. That's simple, okay? Again, not that it happened once by mistake, but he does it on purpose on a regular basis. Afilu, even if it's, and we're talking about l'tiyavon, afilu eno mechalelo ela be'isur derabanan, hareu ke'oved elilim. So he has a din for many halachos, as a goy. It can depends on every halacha specifically. It might be a little different. Certainly for here, we're doing Eruvin Chatzeros, and okay. So for this din, we don't want to learn from him. So he has the din of a non-Jew 100%. That the only way is to rent it from him, rent the space from him. Okay. Now again, this could be if a person does it lahachis, so then it could be any mitzvah, and also when it comes to befarhesia, so it needs to be at least in front of 10 people, or knowing it's going to be seen and known about by many people, or more than 10 people. Okay, I think that's good. And also, if a person wouldn't do it, now this is common, there are many people who are Mechal Shabbos, Befarhesia, in front of people, right? But in front of their rabbi, they wouldn't do it. So then they also don't have a din of again, I'm sure there's a little bit of a debate, but in general, if you wouldn't do it in front of your rabbi or an Adam Gadol, then you are also, don't have a din of a goy. V'im eino, we're going to keep reading, V'im eino mechalel ela betzina, but he just did it betzina, this is Shabbos, afilu mechalelo be'isr de'araita areo ki Yisrael u'mevatel reshus. So no, he still has a din of a Jew, and he can be mevatel as reshus. Okay. Dalet. Yisrael shehemir. V'hayulu batim mishchunat Yisrael she'ervu l'kol hashana. So you had a chatzer, or a city, let's just say a chatzer, and you had homes around them, everybody was religious, and then all of a sudden one of them decided, in the middle of the year, he's no longer keeping Shabbos. Im ein lo petach acher. Klal, and if he has no other way to leave, his house, there's only one way for his house to leave into the main street, is to go through this chatzah that all of you use. So then he's oser on all of you for the rest of the year. Again, if b'chol Shabbat shechal le'achar shehemir, for every other Shabbos after he is no longer from. In the middle of Shabbos itself, it's fine, right? But anytime, generally speaking, anytime you have an eruv that was kosher when Shabbos started, it continues to be kosher, right? Unless it's kind of like a lamafreya idea. Retroactively when you realize you never had one. But okay. Aval, im yesh lo petach acher l'shchunat Yehudi, but let's say you have a house where this non-Jew, or this Jew lives who became non-from, and he has two ways to leave his home. There could be the main entrance goes into the chatzer, like everybody else, and then from there you can get into the main street. Or he has a back door that he doesn't like to use so much, and he doesn't usually use it. But this back door of his house, again, this maybe for our purposes is going to be rare. This back door doesn't lead into this chatzer. It leads into some other chatzer, or straight into the Mavoi. That's a different way, and he doesn't have to go into the chatzer that you're using. So then, afilu petach katan shelo yaragil bo mitchila, even though it wasn't a normal size door, and he doesn't usually go that way. Dochin oto etzel petach hapatuach l'shchinot en Yehudi. So you basically tell him, from now on, you should use the other door and go out the way through the other chatzer where there's non-Jews. You like them anyway, so you should just go that way. I'm not exactly sure how that's enforced, but okay. Shin Pei Vav. Okay. Shin Pei Vav. Dine Shituf Be'eruv. Okay. So now we're talking about Shituf. So until now we were mainly dealing with an Eruv Chatzeros. Eruv Chatzeros it's for one Chatzer to combine people's houses, their dira, where they live. And similarly, but they're going to have some different halachos. Now we're going to be discussing what we call Shituf Mavuyos, where we're combining chatzeros, not individual homes where people sleep. We're combining chatzeros into a Mavoi. So therefore you're going to have a couple differences. Because we're not dealing with where people sleep, we're dealing with just usage areas. Okay, so let's read. Asru chachamim latato chatzeros lamavoi. One's Isur derabanan. Right, because we're saying a Mavoi has 4 walls, halachic 4 walls, to make it Rosh Hashanah. Chatzeros also have Rosh Hashanah, but one's not allowed to carry from a Chatzer to a Mavoi. Right, one's allowed to carry from a Chatzer to a Chatzer if the item's in the Chatzer, but one can't carry from a Chatzer to a Mavoi. Ve'tir de Shituf shegovin pat o davar acher mimine hamachal mikol Chatzer v'Chatzer v'notin oto be'echad min hachatzeros. So what do? We make a little, we join food. We can grab bread or any food. It doesn't have to be bread. For Eruv Chatzeros, it has to be only bread or something similar to bread. Pasab v'kisna. But when it comes to Eruv Chatzer, for Shituf Mavayos, it could be any food. Mikol Chatzer v'Chatzer for notin. And then normally for an Eruv Chatzeros, where do you have to keep the bread? Must be inside a house. Can't be outside. For Shituf Mavuyos, it could be inside any of the Chatzer. It has to be a place that's somewhat watched, or I think we're going to read that. So in other words, it could be in a Chatzer. Chatzer has a fence, it's a little bit more private, we call that's fine. Can't be left in the Mavoi itself. Okay? V'anu ro'im ki'ilu patuach kol ha'mavoi la'ota Chatzer. And we just feel, and then through this way, it makes everything adjoined, and it makes like the Mavoi is is straight open to the Chatzer, and it's all one Chatzer. And since we're only coming to combine Chatzeros, you're allowed to leave it in the air space, in other words, in the outdoors of the Chatzer. Or you're allowed to put it inside a house that doesn't have a din of a house. It could be less than 4 by 4 amos. Now, it could also be a house. You don't have to leave it outside. You can leave it indoors also. But we're allowing you to leave it in the Chatzer. And you don't have to put it specifically inside a proper house. Again, but you're allowed to. It has to be a place where people watch, like a Chatzer. We don't leave it in the outside airspace, or in the outside of the Mavoi. We can only leave it in the Chatzer. Base. Now, three Jews or groups of Jews, they live in different Mavois. So they're separate. Or whatever, they're Chatzeros or Mavois, but they're not, it's not connected or contiguous. They can't just go from one to another. They can't get there from one to another it could be from a couple of different reasons. Either it's locked and there's no way for them to get out. That's what we're about to read. V'daltos kolecha me'makomos ne'ulim b'layla v'hashamash go v'kemach mikulam. So there's no way for them to leave. There's doors that are locked to keep them separate. Or it could be that you have to go through an area that doesn't have an Eruv. It could be through another Mavoi that doesn't have a proper Eruv or Shituf. Or you didn't rent from the Goy. Or it's through a Rosh Hashanah. Whatever it is, in other words, you can't connect one from another and walk there and carry there. So then, it's a problem if one guy the shamash collects the food and keeps it outside. Or in one of them, because they can't connect from one to another on Shabbos. In other words, it doesn't help to join this way. Because the shituf that's connecting you, that you're using, has to be inside one of the chatzeros that you're using, and that you're being connected to, that you can walk to and use. It doesn't help to leave it in someone else's mavoi, or in some other city. It has to be in your chatzer. Right? Or one of your chatzeros. And if it's, you're separated, or you're far from each other, and you can't get to one another, Ein shitufan echad, it's not one shituf. Ve'ein mavim ke'echad. And so there's no way it's not being considered as being joined as one, and therefore it doesn't work. Agav. Ve'im eruv b'makom echad. If you make a proper eruv in one area. אין אחרים שלא ערבו אוסרים עליהם הויל ואין להם ג'יסס הרגל זה על זה. Now, כי אין כל העיר חשובה כמבוי אחד, אף על פי שיושבים בהקף כל מאחס. Alright, so basically this just means, there's a little bit of discussion how to read this, but basically it means that as long as you make an Eruv Chatzeros, and you have a proper Chatzer, or Shituf Mavoyos, and you have a proper Shituf with your Mavoi, then no one's going to answer what you created if they're in a separate Mavoi, or a separate Chatzer with separate walls. Or if you're together in one Chatzer, or in one Mavoi, and someone there answers you, like for whatever reasons we explained, he didn't join, or he's a non-Jew, he didn't rent, then the only way to fix that is if you make a separation between you, like you make a wall, or you make a tzurat petach. Basically, it's just saying, anytime you have a proper chatzer, another proper chatzer that's not completely open, in other words, you have a doorway in between you to separate you, a different chatzer, a different mavoi, is not going to answer one that was done correctly. That's really what it means. Gimel. Kecho mishpatei eruvei chatzeros v'shiro. Just like we learned whatever the rules were for eruvei chatzeros and for making the proper shira for it. V'sheishto mi'arevet bishvilo. For example, a woman can make it for her husband, even if he doesn't know about it. V'shema'arvin shalola daito, and that it's done, you can make an error without him knowing. Im ein habayit patuach el chatzer achas. Or if there is no way, there's no other way for him to go from one chatzer from his house, except it's through yours, so he's benefiting from you. So you can even make an eruv without him knowing, or take some of his bread and include it in the eruv. V'shekatan yachol ligboso, or a katan from him, a child who lives in him, in this person's house, you can also take from him and use it. V'shiyachol echad lezakos lakulam, where you just have one person and he's mezaka for everybody. One person buys the batza matzah, lifts it up, and has someone else pick it up, and he's mezaka for everybody. V'shimayu shutafim ein tzrichim la'ariv, or if they're partners, they live together, they don't have to, and they're eating together, they don't have to make an eruv. Kach dinei shituf. Basically, all the basic halachos that we learned by eruvei chatzeros apply here as well. The main two differences we mentioned is one could be with bread, only bread, and one could be with all foods. And does it have to be in the house specifically, or can it also be outside the house in the chatzar? That's the main difference. Otherwise, halachos are very similar. Even if you have the neighbors, let's say you have 3 neighbors, and two of them are in the same business. They're partners in the same business of wine, and then one of that neighbors with another neighbors in the same business of oil. Ein sarich lishtatif. If they each have their oil and their wine together, and so since they're by definition they're sharing the same food, ein sarich lishtatif. They don't have to make another shituf from levayos. They're already connected. V'hu sheyeh b'kli echad. And that's if it's in the same kli. They have to be in, let's say they each have a bottle of one, and it has to be put together in the same kli. We learned, not to get too complicated, but just to touch upon, we learned sometimes they don't have to be in the same kli. If there's no room, it doesn't fit, and it was done for this purpose. Okay, but simply put, if it's in one kli, that's better. But there are some poskim who say, you can't combine 2 liquids if they don't go together. Okay, so we'll just leave that as a hara. So dalet. Now, bottom line, mishtatzvim b'chol minei machal. You're allowed to combine any types of food. It could be vegetables, it could be meat, it could be bread, and you can combine them together to reach the proper amount that's necessary. V'afilu arba'a v'chamisha minei machal mitztarfim. Even 4 or 5 different types of foods. It could be mistarfing to reach lamazon shtei seudos. Once you have enough food for 2 meals, then that's enough for as many people as you want. It includes everybody. And mazon shtei seudos, so if it's bread, we learned it's the volume of 6 or 8 eggs. Okay, so that we learned a few simanim ago. Okay, I think we'll continue to hay. Yeah. You can use any food. So now we're going to give some examples. Chutz gudge daniyot shehukshu lazera. Or, not exactly sure what that means, but some kind of, I will just say either, it could be anything, it could be herbs or the actual seeds, or beans, whatever it is, and it became too hard, and you can't eat it. Vitavlin, or just spices straight. A bag of spices is not going to work. Upolin, yeveshim, or you have dried beans, they're not cooked yet, you can't eat them yet. V'lo ba'alei b'tzalim, shelo gadlu orach zeret. Or, the onions are, so here if you just read the words of the Shulchan Aruch, he says, you can't use onions that are too small because it's like, it's completely not edible. But, he says, the Mishnah Berurah says, even bigger onions, we don't eat them raw. Maybe it depends where you live. He says, we don't eat them raw, so they're edible, but you don't eat them raw. So he says, or plain. So therefore, betzalim by themselves don't count, but they work if you include them with other food. And you can't use mushrooms. They're not usually eaten on their own. And the Gra disagrees, especially when they're cooked, because people do. Not all these straight kernels. No vegetables that are partially cooked. Bottom line, it must be something that is edible right now. It's not something you can cook it after Shabbos. No, it has to be edible right now. And it doesn't even have to, we're going to see, we started to see, it doesn't have to be 100% edible by itself. If you're only using this item, then it has to be 100% edible now by itself. But you can combine it with other things to be mistar after the 6 or 8 eggs, or have it with the bread or with other food, and then it does count if you eat it with other foods. V'lo b'mayim levadam, it can't be only water by itself, because only water by itself is not really considered food. V'lo melach levado, and not salt all by itself. But you can use them if you mix in flavors and other items with the water and with the salt, then they can be mistar after the shear. V'yesh omrim the dafka kishanata antochan shemen. Some say only if you put in oil. V'yesh omrim shema'arvim metavlin. And some say you can include spices into your. Okay, so we'll continue. I think we'll do one more. So anyways, it's usually recommended just to take a simple box. Practically, it's usually recommended just to use a box of matzah. So you avoid all the questions. Is it a mavoi? Is it an eruv? Because again, these things won't work if it's an eruv chatzeros. And this way you just don't have any questions. Alright. Obviously, if there is no matzah, it's good to know these halachas when you need them. But usually, we're dealing with eruv chatzeros anyway. Vav, one more. Kol davar sheregilim lav pas. So now, any item that you normally eat for a meal, you eat it with bread. That's the norm. So shi'uro, this item that's 100% edible, and you normally eat it with the meal with bread, so then the shiur of this item is the amount of food, lapis bo apas anechal ishtei sudos, the amount of this food that you normally eat for 2 meals. So as we discussed before, probably 1 large piece of chicken, 1 large piece of schnitzel would suffice. Maybe 3 tablespoons of hummus would suffice. Because that's probably whatever the amount is. Everyone can use their imagination. And certainly you can use these foods to be included in the shear if you're using bread as the shear, which is 6 or 8 beitzim. Okay. Uvasar chai. Now what about raw meat? Lo ave liftan. Raw meat is not considered liftan. You don't eat raw meat with bread. And so therefore you need to have enough raw meat of 2 seudos. Now, raw meat, if it's really raw, so the Mishnah Berurah points out probably that wouldn't be good enough because it's not edible. So we're talking about raw meat that was salted and is now because of the salt or pickling, now it's considered edible. Or if when it means basar chai, he doesn't mean mamish basar chai, he means just a little bit cooked, but it's almost like, I guess what some people would call rare. Again, some people would call that raw, and some people would call rare even overdone. But anyways, aval sali have a liftan, but if it's grilled, so that's certainly called liftan v'shir lapis bosh desidos, and you just needed as much meat as normally eaten for a meal. Chometz have a liftan. Vinegar is considered something that goes with bread. V'ched yain mevushal, so too cooked wine. Aval yain chai, raw wine. Lo have liftan, that's not considered going with the meal, and therefore you have to have enough of it all by itself. V'shiuro shtei revios, and so you have to have at least full 2 revios of these liquids. V'chein shiur sha'ar mashkim, and all liquids that are edible the way they are, but they're not. It doesn't go with the bread, so then that's 2 revios.